Ask people why they procrastinate, and you'll often hear something like this. I'm a perfection. Everything has to be just right before I can get down to work. No distractions, not too much noise, no telephone calls interrupting me. And of course, I have to be feeling well physically too. I can't work when I have a headache. The other end of procrastination, being unable to finish, also has a perfectionist explanation. I'm just never satisfied. I'm my own harshest critic. If all of the I's aren't dotted and all the T's aren't crossed, I just can't consider that I'm done. That's just the way I am, and I'll probably never change. Do you see what's going on here? A fall is being turned into a virtue. The perfectionist is saying that his standards are just too high for this world. This fault into virtue syndrome is a common defense when people are called upon to discuss their weaknesses, but in the end, it's just a very pious kind of excuse-making. It certainly doesn't have anything to do with what's really behind procrastination. The basis of procrastination could be fear of failure. That's what extreme perfectionism really is. Once you take a hard look at it, what's the difference? Whether you're afraid of being less than perfect or afraid of anything else, you're still paralyzed by fear. What's the difference? Whether you never start or never finish, you're still stuck. You're still going nowhere. You're still overwhelmed by whatever task is before you. You're still allowing yourself to be dominated by a negative vision of the future in which you see yourself being criticized or laughed at or punished or ridden out of town on a rail. Of course, this negative vision of the future is really a mechanism that allows you to do nothing. It's a very convenient mental tool. Well, I'm going to tell you how to overcome procrastination. I'm going to show you how to turn procrastination into perseverance. And if you do what I suggest, the process will be virtually painless. I'm going to be very specific about how you can do this. A moment ago, I referred to a negative vision of the future as a mental tool for inactivity. If you've been using that tool, I'm going to ask you to talk to the side and start using two other very powerful principles that foster productivity and perseverance instead of passivity and procrastination. The first principle is break it down. No matter what you're trying to accomplish, whether it's writing a book or climbing a mountain or painting a house, the key to achievement is your ability to break down the path into manageable pieces and knock them off one at a time. Focus on accomplishing what's right in front of you at this moment and ignore what's off in the distance someplace. Substitute real-time positive thinking for negative future visualization. That's the first all-important technique for bringing an end to procrastination. So as I were to ask you if you could write a 400-page novel, if you're like most people, that would be an impossible task. As soon as I asked you that question, a picture appears in your mind of a big fat book lying on a coffee table, hundreds and hundreds of words covering every page. Yes, somebody must have written the book that you see in your mind's eye, but that person surely wasn't you. Suppose I asked you a different question. Suppose I ask if you can write a page in a far a day for 1 year. Do you think you could do it now? The task is starting to seem more manageable. We're breaking down the 400-page book into bite-sized pieces, but even so, I suspect many people would still find the prospect intimidating. Do you see why writing a page in a quarter may not seem so bad? But you're being asked to look ahead 1 whole year. When people start to look that far ahead, many of them automatically go into a negative mode. So let me formulate the idea of writing a book in yet another way. Let me break it down even more. Suppose I were to ask you, can you fill up a page and a half with words, not for a year, not for a month, not even for a week, but just today? Don't look any further ahead than that. I believe most people would confidently declare that they could accomplish that. And of course, these would be the same people who feel totally incapable of writing a whole book. And if I said the same thing to those people tomorrow, if I told them I don't want you to look back, I don't want you to look ahead, I just want you to fill up a page. And if we're this day, do you think you can do it 1 day at a time? You probably heard that phrase. That's what we're doing here. We're breaking the time required for a major task down into 1 day segment, and we're breaking the work involved in writing a 400-page book down into page and a quarter income. Keep this up for 1 year and you'll write the book. Discipline yourself to look neither forward nor backward, and you can accomplish things you never thought you could possibly do. One of the beauties of this technique is the fact that you can really take it to the extremes if you have to. If writing a page and a quarter during 1 day still seems too much for you, break it down even more. Try to write 3 sentences in the next hour. Don't any further ahead than that. come up with a way of looking at the task that finally seems manageable, then all you have to do is persevere. Procrastination won't be a problem because the task is now so small that fear will kick in. And it all begins with those 3 words. Break it down. My second technique for defeating procrastination is also only 3 words long. The 3 words are write it down. We've seen how important writing is to goal setting. The writing you'll do for beating procrastination is very similar. But instead of focusing on the future, you are now going to be writing about the present just as you experience it every day. Instead of describing the things that you want to do or the places you want to go, you're going to describe what you actually do with your time. And you're going to keep a written record of the places you actually go. In other words, you're going to keep a diary of your activity. And you're going to be amazed by the distractions, detours, and downright waste of time that you come up with during the course of the day. All of these get in the way of achieving your goals. For many people, it's almost like they planned it that way, and maybe at some unconscious level they did. The great thing about keeping a time diary is that it brings all this out in the open. It forces you to see what you're actually doing and what you're not doing. A time diary doesn't have to be anything elaborate. Just buy a little spiral notebook that you can easily carry in your pocket. When you go to lunch, when you drive across town, when you go to the dry cleaners, when you spend some time shooting the breeze at the coffee machine, make a quick note of time you began the activity and the time it ended. Try to make this notation as soon as possible. But if it's inconvenient to do it immediately, you can do it later. But you should make an entry in your time diary at least once every 30 minutes, and you should keep this up for at least a week. What else do you have to do to gain the benefits of this extremely powerful productivity technique? Nothing. You don't have to do anything else at all. It's just a process for making yourself aware of how you actually spend your time. You'll naturally and effortlessly begin to reorganize your life. Perhaps that seems like too much to believe, but it's true. When you're forced to write down the fact that you hung out at the coffee machine for 15 minutes today, you'll think twice about doing that again tomorrow. When you've got to put it in writing that you worked on an important project for 30 minutes today and then took a break to read the newspaper, you'll persevere a little longer on the project tomorrow and forget about the newspaper. Just try keeping a time diary for 1 week, and you'll see how it can revolutionize your ability to focus and achieve your goals. Break it down, write it down. Very easy to understand, very straightforward. But these are powerful and effective productivity techniques. This is how you put an end to procrastination. This is how you get yourself started. But how do you keep going? How do you keep your motivation consistently high? How do you learn to persevere when the novelty is worn off and you're still some distance from your goal? We'll talk about that in a moment. The Irish poet William Butler Yeats once wrote a poem describing some of the unfortunate characteristics of the modern world. One of the things Yeats noticed was the fact that bad people seem to have the most energy, while good people become discouraged and doubtful of their own ability. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with passion and intensity. Those are the words Yeats used. And it's true that we can look around the world and see all sorts of things happening that we might wish were not happening. And there are people working very hard to make those things happen for reasons that we might not admire. And when we see that, it's easy to start saying, what's the use? What hope do I really have? Why don't I just give up on all the things I've been trying to accomplish and just start taking it easy? Even people of strong character feel that way sometimes. All of us have moments like that. That's when perseverance gets really, really tough. What's the answer? Well, you recall that during our discussion of goal setting, I asked you to list 5 categories for your long-term goals. What do you want to do? What do you want to be? What do you want to see? What do you want to have? Where do you want to go now? I want you to add another one. With whom do you want to share? In other words, who are you working for besides yourself? In the first 5 categories, you were asked to focus exclusively on your own aspirations and why they were important to you. But now I want you to think in terms of other people. Who is depending on you? Who will benefit if you persevere and succeed? Who will suffer if you give up and stop trying? Who can you reach out to and help once you've achieved your goal? Write down answers to these questions just like you wrote answers for the other categories. For many people, the answers will appear quite readily. If you have a family, your spouse and your children are depending on you. Perhaps even your parents are depending on you now, if they're elderly and require some care. But even if you're a single person or just starting out in your career, you can think of reasons to persevere and succeed that go beyond your personal needs. Maybe you would like to share some of your financial success with the schools that educated you, or with the religious institutions that gave you spiritual guidance, or with a hospital that helped to heal you on some occasion. This sharing doesn't have to be limited to money either. If your work has given you certain skills, you can share your time and your abilities. You can, and you should. But even this isn't putting it strongly enough. It isn't just that you'll do better if you feel you're working for others in addition to yourself. You absolutely must find reason outside yourself to persevere. If you want to keep going when the going gets tough, Hemingway wrote, "A man alone hasn't got a chance." And that doesn't mean only that you need people to help you in life. It means also that you need people you can help. You need people who can become the real reason for perseverance above and beyond your material possessions or your financial success. What's in it for me can only take you so far. What's in it for somebody besides me can take you as far as you need to go. In the last days of World War II, the American cruiser Indianapolis was sunk by an enemy submarine. This was one of the most tragic incidents of the war for American forces, in which hundreds of men lost their lives. Many who made it through the initial attack had to spend days and nights in the water before rescuers arrived. The experience of trying to stay alive in the water was so overwhelming that many people simply gave up. In fact, the survivors reported later that virtually everyone wanted to give up at one time or another. But whenever someone wanted to quit trying, the others would talk to him about the people back home who needed him, who were depending on him to survive. And if there was no one who was depending on him right then, they would talk about people in the future who would someday be needing him. People he hadn't met yet, people who hadn't even been born yet. They conjured up all sorts of reasons above and beyond. Simply surviving. This motivation beyond the self was the only motivation that was strong enough. And what was true in an extreme sense for those men in wartime is also true in all our lives, no matter what we're trying to accomplish. But let's suppose that there's a vast, hugely powerful force that nobody can withstand. And this immense force is always active and in furious motion. It never rests. It's like a slowly flowing river that can eventually carve the Grand Canyon out of solid rock, but that comparison doesn't really do it justice. The force I'm talking about is much more formidable than any river or ocean or glacier or any other natural phenomenon. Now, in trying to achieve your life's goals, would you prefer to fight against this great force? Would you want to struggle against this mighty power that has all the odds overwhelmingly in its favor? Or would you rather enlist this great power in your cause and make the inevitable work for you instead of against you? Take your time before answering. Think it over. By the way, time is that great power I'm talking about. Time is the mightiest force in the world, or even in the universe. Of course, the answer to the question I pose is very obvious. Why would you ever choose to fight time when you could have time on your side? Who wouldn't want to harness the great river of time that flows through all of life? Why wouldn't you want to use the power of time to generate power in every area of your existence, to turn the turbines of your hopes and dreams, to charge your every aspiration with lightning bolts of electricity? Well, there's only one way to make time work for you, not against you, and that's with patience. There have been some items in the news lately about changes in the climate, global warming, and so forth, and how the level of the seas will rise during the coming years and put whole communities underwater that now stand high and dry. All I can tell you is that in certain parts of the country, it's been plenty hot and dry the last few summers. And I'm sure there have been times when the residents of those areas would have liked to have seen some big ocean waves come rolling across the plain. Think for a moment about any state that's in the middle of this continent, away from the coast, and ponder this question. What do you suppose it would take to turn that state into a kind of surfer's paradise? So when it gets hot, you could just go out and let the waves cool you off. For example, what would you need in order to turn Texas into California? You take the perspective of an engineer, you'd maybe think about the water rights, the dams, and all the good stuff. You need the kind of undertaking that would make the Hoover Dam and Lake Mead look like a little inflatable backyard swimming pool. From that perspective, the whole notion's not only impractical, it's impossible. But if you believe everything that's been written about global warming and rising water, you realize that it isn't really an impossible proposition. In fact, some people are saying it's inevitable. You don't need any water rights or dams to see it happen either. All you need is patience. Here's another illustration of the power of patience. Imagine you're at a cottage in New England. When a blizzard hits, there's more snow in less time than any other winter on record. If you went to bed in the middle of this blizzard, you'd probably assume that when you got up, you'd have to shovel the drifts away from the front door just to get down the steps. You may even think about getting started on the work before you go to bed. But in this case, as it turns out, all of that bedtime effort wouldn't have been necessary overnight. The wind keeps blowing, and while you sleep, it shifts around 180 degrees, so all the snow on your front porch is cleared away. Naturally, you don't have to knock yourself out with a shovel. You may be saving yourself from a stiff back or a heart attack, and all you had to do was wait. Patience. There's a type of person for whom everything is undertaken out of desire to achieve a goal. They prepare food in order to eat it, not just for the fun of being in the kitchen. They start a business in order to make money. They exercise in order to get in shape. I'm sure that some of these people are very successful, and they are certainly highly organized. But in my opinion, a person of truly strong character sees success as an adventure, not as a point with an estimated time of arrival. The latter approach to me is impatient thinking. Impatient can lead a person into some very big mistakes. First of all, when you're always looking somewhere else, whether it's down the road or up toward the top of the mountain or off toward the left field fence where you're hoping to hit that grand slam home run. When you're looking off in the distance like that, you often miss what's under your very own nose. That means the pleasure and fun of living, which come in the here and now, get overlooked for something that not only isn't here yet, but might never arrive true. Patience is more than just a waiting game. Patience doesn't mean you sit around hoping for something to happen. Patience is not a passive quality. Sometimes patience can mean doing something else entirely. Thinking about another venture, taking off in a different direction while you give events a chance to run their course. All through his long career on the screen, John Wayne never felt he got the credit and recognition he deserved for his skills as an actor. Yes, his films were consistently successful at the box office, and even today, John Wayne is still the #1 favorite movie actor in the United States. But a big following among moviegoers didn't translate into critical esteem or the respect of his peers. That's what the Duke wanted, and he felt he deserved it too. Then, the last years of his life, he made a movie called True Grit, in which he played a drunken, one-eyed old US Marshal named Rooster Cogburn. That portrayal got John Wayne the Oscar he'd been waiting 40 years for. It wasn't the kind of high and mighty hero role he'd played when he was young. It finally got him his award, but it was a role that he'd waited for all his life, and he didn't even know it was coming. A colleague of mine told me this story. He was traveling cross-country on a speaking tour and found himself delayed in Chicago while changing planes in the first-class traveler's lounge. He fell into conversation with a gentleman who actually looked a bit like John Wayne during his True Grit. And he was a little surprised to learn this gentleman was actually from New York City. And there was another surprise. Despite his refund appearance, this fellow traveler proved to be extremely soft-spoken. His favorite pastime was playing chess. But as he talked about his experiences in the construction business in New York City, he also demonstrated that he carried a big stick. His company had developed some of the most important commercial real estate in Manhattan, as successful people always do when they encounter other successful individuals. My colleague asked him how he'd done it. Well, he said, after I got my engineering degree, I spent some years getting hands-on experience in construction. I didn't want to be supervising people in any jobs that I didn't know how to do myself. So later on, when I started putting together my own project, I had to deal with some pretty tough streetwise operators, cement company guys, building inspectors, trucking companies. But I never tried to pretend I was any kind of hard case myself. I used to tell them right up front, you play straight with me and I'll play straight with you. I never tried to take advantage of anybody, but I never let anyone take advantage of me either. You see, I always was, and I still am, a great counterpuncher. Anybody who takes a shot at me in business had better make sure it's a good one, because I'm going to hit back hard. But it's like chess. You don't necessarily hit back right away. You have to be patient. You have to wait for the right moment. You have to let the other guy know, okay, you had your chance. Next time it's my turn, but you don't say that out loud. You don't say what you've got in mind, and you don't say when it might be coming. You just go on polite and friendly as ever. You don't ever let on that you're waiting for an opening, but you rest assured that your chance will come. Like any other investment, it takes patience. Patience is the key. Needless to say, those several hours between flights were both informative and enjoyable for my colleague, and we can all learn from this story. Don't concentrate on things you can't influence, like when the planes are going to take off. Instead, focus on things you can control. And when you meet somebody you can learn from, then learn everything you can while you got the chance. You never know when you're going to come across a book or an article that will provide a piece of information that can transform your life. One thing is for sure, however, and I've said this many times, the book you don't read isn't going to help. And it's the same with meeting people. You never know who is going to be able to teach you exactly what you need to know. Even if you don't need to know it now, you might need to know it at some point in the future. That might not be for 15 years, but it might just be in 15 minutes too. A patient man is always richer than an impatient one, even if the patient man has less money. What do I mean by that statement? Well, riches and wealth can take other forms besides dollars and cents. Okay, that sounds good. So in what sense is the patient man richer? The actual answer is very simple. A patient man is always richer than the impatient one, because the patient man can always afford to wait. The patient man is never desperate. The patient man has time to spare, while the man in a hurry is always on the verge of bankruptcy as far as time is concerned. In any situation you can think of, impatience is a source of weakness and fear, while patience is substance and strength. And here's another way that patience gives the person who has it an incalculable advantage over the person who doesn't, and gives him deeper insight into himself and others, which is a mark of great character. If you can only see the short term, if you can only think in terms of the here and now, then you are like a man with one eye. You can't judge distances. You live in a world that's flat and two-dimensional. In other words, the impatient person lacks all sense of perspective. Perspective lets you measure your plans and current events against things that have already occurred, and also against your desires and aspirations for the future. Then and now, here and there, near and far, need and know, watch and wait. These are the dual optics that allow the patient man to see in stereo. Where the nearsighted person sees only the present, or the dreamer sees only an imaginary future, and more likely than not trips over his mistakes trying to get there. The history of this century can tell us a great deal about the value of patience and perspective. History proves that time is the strongest ally you can possibly have. No matter what the odds against you or the level of adversity you're facing, time gives strength to those who have it on their side. This truth was very convincingly demonstrated over the course of World War II. Germany had enormous successes in the early years of the war, with the Blitzkrieg, surprise lightning strike from the air and land without warning that was used first against Poland and later against the countries of Western Europe. Japan also used surprise attacks successfully, and almost gained a decisive advantage with the treacherous bombing of the unsuspecting American fleet at Pearl Harbor. But the nations that were allied against Germany and Japan knew the time was on their side, and they were prepared to be patient. Although you won't find this discussed in many history books, one of the most important events of World War II actually took place right here in the United States, a few months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. At that time, the U.S. Army held a series of massive military exercises in Louisiana, which were designed to assess the preparedness of the American forces for participation in the war that was spreading across the globe. As it happened, those war games in Louisiana revealed glaring deficiencies in our military preparedness. It quickly became obvious to our military commanders that if America was soon drawn into the war, as many believed it would be, there would have to be a long period of rebuilding and modernization. And this would have to take place at the same time, as American forces would be fighting all over the world with inferior and outdated equipment. And that is exactly what happened. It took almost 3 years of patience and hard work and sacrifice before the U.S. war machine was brought up to modern standards. But President Franklin Roosevelt and generals such as Eisenhower and MacArthur knew that the wait would be well worthwhile, and that once the modernization was completed, victory would be assured. On the other side of the Atlantic, it was much the same story. Winston Churchill knew that England would have to endure months and years of bombing and threats of invasion, but he also knew that time was on his side. With great patience and courage, the British people waited out the bombing raids by planes and rockets. At last the tide began to turn, and the world realized that patience and endurance was going to defeat the most devastating attack that had ever been seen up to that time. In Russia, too, the city of Leningrad was under siege for more than a year. But the Russians knew the value of patience perhaps better than anyone else more than a century earlier. After all, they had left their bitter climate. In the sheer size of their land, the French armies under Napoleon and the same natural forces eventually prevailed against the new invader. It was patient countries, the United States, England, and Russia, who won the Second World War against enemies who banked on surprise and the hope of a quick victory. There's no area of human activity that requires more patience than raising children. If you haven't got patience when you start out in this, you're going to have to learn it one way or the other. A baby is born after 9 months. If the future mother is tired of pregnancy before the time has expired, well, that's too bad, because there's still 2 months to go, whether she likes it or not. And when the child does arrive, he or she grows and develops at a pace that's quite beyond the parent's control. Parents who try to force a child's development are asking for trouble. And this is one point on which psychology and common sense are in complete agreement. We've all heard of parents who think they can create another Einstein by giving their 2-year-old a book on astrophysics. Or that if a child is made to play the piano for an hour a day, it will bring about the second coming of Mozart. None of this works, of course, and it also ignores the fact that all real prodigies develop completely according to their own timetable. And even then, the result was usually not exactly what one might have hoped for. Mozart, for example, had a very difficult later life. And he died young, in part, because he grew up so much sooner than her children. He never really had a childhood, and at 30, he was already an old man anyway. It doesn't take textbooks on physics or hours of music or any other kind of force to teach something effectively to children. It just takes one thing. It takes patience. It may seem like a callous comparison, but there's a sense in which raising children is like any other investment. So much depends on when you need to cash in your chips. If you're in a hurry, if you need to see results tomorrow, you're putting a lot of pressure on everybody, and there's likely to be a great deal of disappointment. But if you can afford to wait, you can ride out the hard times and eventually realize a profit. The odd thing is, sometimes waiting for years is easier than it is to wait for a few days or even a few minutes. None of us felt too strained because we had to wait 12 years to go through grammar school, middle school, and high school before getting out. Or at least the first 11 and a half years didn't strain my patience, but asked me to wait 45 minutes for a plane flight for 20 minutes in the waiting room of a dentist office. And if you catch me on the wrong day, it's almost more than I can handle. We all find ways to wait for the next paycheck, but how many can wait patiently in a checkout line in a crowded supermarket? How many people can stand and wait quietly for an overdue train on a railroad platform? It's as though there are two kinds of patience, the kind that sets you up for the long term and gives you the promise of a better and richer day after tomorrow. Then there's the other kind, the sort of patience that helps you remain sane and sociable while you're waiting in line or watching the clock or waiting for a pot of water to boil. These kinds of patience, so different and yet so much the same, mailed into your character and have a fundamental effect on your physical constitution. Any doctor will tell you that it's better for you and everyone around you if you don't get exasperated with little things. If you don't fly off the handle at every annoyance and stick in your way, it keeps your blood pressure down and your friends and neighbors happy if you can greet life's little problems with equanimity and patience. Because almost all problems can be solved if only you take the time to see them and think them through. That's very easy to understand and it's very easy to say, but it takes strong character to put it into practice. I'm never sure what to think when people say I want to make $1 million by the time I'm 40 or I want to retire by the age of 45. This combination of goals plus deadlines strikes me as short-sighted and maybe even a bit naive. It takes a worthwhile goal and subjects it to an imposed timetable. While you might have an idea of what $1 million would mean to you, or you might have really exciting plans for your life after you hang up the tie and business suit, I don't see how a person can reasonably expect to know who or what he will be or think or feel at some arbitrary moment in the future. This kind of thinking misses the whole point of success. The real payoff in financial and worldly success isn't the result of an amount of money divided by the age you are when you get it, or some other actuarial formula. The real payoff is found in the qualities of character you develop along the way. There's a story about a young man who had a very old and rich uncle. When the uncle died, the young man was called to the office of his attorney and told that he'd been left a huge fortune. To collect it, however, he first had to run a certain errand, which was described on a slip of paper. It seemed simple enough, but when the young man tried to accomplish it, this first task turned into another, and then another. As he pursued his uncle's final request, the young man was led into foreign lands and exotic adventures and untold dangers. More years passed, and the young man nearly lost track of how and even why he was on this long journey, and he could hardly imagine what its end might be. At last, the odyssey led him back into the very same lawyer's office where it had begun. "I'm here to collect mine inheritance," said the heir. No longer a young man, but a much wiser one, the lawyer smiled. "As your uncle intended, you've already collected it in the places you've been and the things you've learned. And again, as he intended, it will last you for a lifetime." Success that comes too easily or too quickly almost never lasts. For people who achieve that kind of success, there's always a lurking feeling that they haven't really earned it, and that feeling eats away at their character. If they're lucky and smart, they create some new challenge for themselves in a totally unfamiliar field. These people have to build their character in order to survive their sudden good fortune. And that's the kind of character building that's done in an emergency. In fact, it's a true case of the cart coming before the horse. This doesn't require patience because there is no waiting or planning or even expectation involved. It's more a test of a person's upbringing than a test of character. We've seen how often the qualities of a strong character demand the presence of opposite qualities in an almost paradoxical way. Patience is no exception. Patience does not mean wait till next year. It means this year, but if not next year, for sure. I think Thomas Edison put it best. Everything comes to him who waits, but it comes sooner to him who hustles while he's waiting.